So how long did it take until you said, oh, I'm starting to feel some relief of all this deep healing work, of all this stuff? And were you doing it alone, or were you doing it with therapists and guides and coaches?
I was doing it in a combo. I was seeing therapists, I was seeing shamans, I was doing medicine work with myself and in community. And then I was creating a lot of processes for myself because I was just 24/7 in my feelings. I was not getting breaks because I hadn't felt any of my childhood. So people would always say, "How are you so normal right now? Like, how are you not just living homeless and addicted to drugs with everything that you've been through?" And I would say, "I'm just fine. Like, I'm
You were
fine."
numbing it.
I didn't know that, but yeah, I was. I just completely denied that I had any pain around it, you know? And so all of that I had to feel, all of it. And that was a lot. And so I started creating processes for myself to get through the long nights when I couldn't sleep.
What's the process look like?
One of them was I created a little meditation for myself to listen to over and over. Another one is I wrote a letter to myself from my inner mother telling me that I was going to be okay and just saying, like, I know that you're in pain right now. Everything's going to be okay. I promise it's not going to feel like this forever. Just loving myself. And I actually put it on my wall, taped to my wall, so that when I would look in the morning over at my wall, I would see it. And because I needed it, I needed that anchor. And there's many other things like writing about the vision of who I wanted to be in partnership with, how I wanted it to look. But also, it was really about deep accountability for how I had shown up in all of those relationships, which was not good.
Not blaming, but also taking responsibility.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a difference because blame is more about judgment and taking responsibility is about action.
Yes.
So for me, I had to take responsibility for the reality that I had never been vulnerable in my partnerships. I wasn't showing up authentically. I wasn't being very loving, and I wasn't really being open.
Mm.
So anyone who entered my field had no clue who I was underneath it all. And I certainly didn't know who they were because I wasn't vulnerable, right? And so we have to take a look at those things if we want to get to the conscious partnership. And that part is hard too, because it's easy to go down the blame train and be like, oh gosh, I did this all. It's all my fault.
Or they did this all to me.
Exactly. But you don't get anywhere that way. That way, that lane, if you get into the blame lane, that means you have to go back and start over in another relationship that's going to repeat the pattern until you keep hitting the wall. And then you're like, okay, I actually have something to do with this.
Right.
The other way is I'm going to take responsibility for my role. Yes, how they showed up is about them, but how I show up also matters, and it's about me. And if I want to create something different, where do I need to grow?
Yeah, and how we respond to people that maybe are doing things out of integrity to us that we don't want, how we react, or, why we stayed, as opposed to saying, hey, this doesn't work for me anymore. This cannot happen. Otherwise, we're not going to be together anymore. Creating boundaries. So
Or even entering the relationship to
in the
begin
first
with.
place, yeah. If it's not a conscious entering, then why are we doing it?
Yeah. I remember the guy that I entered the relationship with when I was 19. I was very young, not a conscious person, but I've always had intuitive hits and visions. Like I do know when something is right or not, or if there's something going to happen. And I sat on his couch and I got a message and it said, this guy is going to be abusive.
Oh my gosh.
And we weren't even living together yet. And, I just moved in with him. Right. And so,
Why do you think you moved in with him?
well, because
If you knew that.
because there wasn't a part of me yet that felt integrated in her inner woman, inner mother. I was just a kid. I was this immature, wounded kid starving for love. And I was addicted to the chaos. And we had very much a passionate, strong sexual connection. And I wanted that feeling, right? I wanted to experience that rush. And so we often do this where we just choose the thing that feels good over the thing that's actually going to get us where we want to be. And we do that so much in relationship and we don't trust ourselves. And then in the end, when it goes bad, we say, oh, well, I can't trust myself because, I always end up in this mess. But I always say, well, did you ever get an intuitive hit or some sense that something wasn't right, but you just dismissed it or pushed it down? Because you can trust yourself. You just don't listen sometimes. And that's the difference. So I had to just learn how to listen.
Because you knew it, but you weren't listening to it and acting on the knowing.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, it takes a long time for us to learn how to trust our intuition.
And act accordingly.
Yeah.
And not go against our traumas, our wounds, or our desires,
Yeah.
but going after a vision instead. So how long was this process until you met your husband? From like the day your former husband was like running away with his girlfriend, car lights, you know, and you're...
She was at my wedding too.
Oh my
and I have a
gosh.
photo of us sitting on a bench.
No.
And his arm is around me and he's looking at her.
Oh,
and I was like,
no.
it's a prophecy. And, you
Oh
know,
my gosh.
some things are just meant to be.
Well, it's probably good that you guys didn't stay together.
Yeah.
So how long was it since that moment of you running out barefoot, screaming like an angry, you know, betrayed woman,
A scorned
woman, and until you felt you had a sense of inner peace,
Yeah.
and a relaxed nervous system where you were able to see people differently, to see yourself differently, and make a decision to be in a conscious relationship? How long was that period?
Well, with the context of the fact that I was doing medicine ceremonies almost every night, breath work every week, and seeing a therapist twice a week, and doing all of those things, within a couple of months, actually, I started to feel different. I started to feel, okay, you know what? I'm actually good with this whole single thing. I'm feeling empowered again.
Self-love, yeah.
I wasn't better or healed, but I was feeling like I had my footing. And I decided not to date anyone. And I was going to be single for 3 years. That was my plan.
I had a similar plan.
Yeah. And within 7 or 8 months, I met Ben. And I remember people telling us, oh, you have to meet Sheleana. Oh, you have to meet Ben. You're going to love each other. And I was like, well, you don't really know me that well. So how do you know? And anyways, we ended up trying to coordinate a date multiple times. And eventually, after me blowing him off, I bumped into him at a coffee shop. And I was in my PJs, hadn't brushed my hair. And I was like, are you Ben? And we just had this knowing, this remembrance of each other. And I'm not really the type to just get physical with a person right away, but I couldn't help but like wrap my arms around him because he was cold and warm him up. And so at first I was very much in denial. Nope, this isn't going to be my partner. We're not going to date.
I still need 2.5 more years
Exactly.
until I
This is not
date
my
anyone.
plan. You know, and it felt really fast too. I was like, is this okay? But inevitably we couldn't write history a different way. That's how it was meant to be. He also had a plan to be single until he was 35, but he ended up getting married to me when he was 35.
Wow.
So that's, you know, how it happened. And it was also a journey, and it still is for us. You know, I would say that I had done enough work to know how to qualify him. And so we moved quite slowly, and we had lots of sleepovers, but we didn't sleep together for quite a while.
It's similar to me.
Yeah, well, because you just psychologically, you need that time. Otherwise, you bond once the hormones get going.
The chemical sexual bond is so hard to break
It is.
once you go there.
Yeah.
Because the feeling is so intense. It's so intense emotionally and physically. And you're bonding each other to these heightened states of emotion.
Yeah.
It's so hard to say, okay, you know, that's why it makes it easier to overlook someone's challenges or red flags when you've bonded.
Exactly.
Because you're like, well, I want to get that feeling again. So if they're lying over here, if they're mean to people here, if they're abusive to me a little bit here, let's just go back to that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But when you create a space of a relationship without that feeling, and you get to see the full person, which I think the longer you can do that, the better.
And have a friendship, right?
A friendship. And see, could I spend 10,000 meals with this person? Would I enjoy my time with this person over 10,000 meals? Would I want to spend time with them if we didn't have a sexual intimacy?
Yeah.
If so, okay, cool. I wonder what it'd be like with that as well. And I never thought that way until I started the healing journey. But it gave me a lot clearer sense of direction once I felt like a sense of safety and peace within me to make those steps as well. That's so interesting you guys did that. So how long were you together until you got married?
About 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah. And when we were about 2 or 3 months in, we right away started doing therapy and Tantra groups.
Shut up.
We did.
That's amazing. We started therapy too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's necessary.
I recommend it for everyone starting
Yeah.
a relationship.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not because something's wrong or broken, but because you want to create agreements and connection and communication early on.
Yeah, well, and you learn how to be intimate and you really put it all out on the table. There's no holding back. We joined this conscious relationship circle where you're doing group shadow work and processing your ego in front of a room together. And then you're doing these deep tantric exercises with your partner. And so I remember inviting him and he was like, well, it's pretty new. And he was the opposite of me. I always had long relationships that lasted way too long. And he had a lot of short relationships over the last 10 years. So he was like, well, what if we're not together still? Like that's pretty big commitment. And I was like, we're going to be together.
Wow.
And so he said yes. And he's often a great sport. And we dove in. And it was because of that work that we were able to deepen and heal and do so much work together. And the nervous system stuff has taken years and years. It's not like, oh, we found each other. Now we're in a conscious relationship.
Yeah.
No, it's not like that.
Do you think it's possible to find love, lasting love, if you haven't healed yet?
I do. And I think there's degrees. There's degrees of healing because I don't think any of us are healed in terms of we're perfect. But we can be on the journey and be self-aware enough and to know how to qualify a person for willingness. And if we meet a person who has the willingness and the core values match, and both people say, yes, here's my baggage, here's your baggage, I see you and I acknowledge that this isn't going to always be easy, but I'm willing to do the work along the way, that's a great sign that the relationship has potential because that was Ben and I.
You're both on a healing journey.
We were on a healing journey together.
Yeah, of course.
We weren't like, oh, we've done our work and now we're going to fade off into the sunset together. We're like, okay, we're committed to being together. And soon we quickly realize there's no better match than each other. And yet it's still going to be difficult. So when it gets difficult, what are we going to do about it? That's the thing you need to clarify. Because if you're with a person who says, well, relationships should be easy, if we have to see a therapist or if we need to do inner work, then there's something wrong, which is the belief system of many people out there, then you don't have a chance. But if you're both aware enough to say, yeah, I've got some stuff, I'm avoidant or I'm anxious and I'm going to work on that and I want to work on it with you, great.
What I think is interesting, listen, I don't have kids yet, so I know I'm going to get a ton of comments about this. Wait till you have kids. It's going to get harder. It's going to all these different things. I get it. And I'm not discounting anyone's experience. But my personal experience has been, if you're willing to do the work together up front and be willing to consistently work on yourself and together throughout the relationship, I believe the relationship should be easy or easier because you're constantly you're putting an effort on growing individually and together. Then it should be, yes, there's going to be challenges and adversities and breakdowns, but because you're in it together, growing together, taking responsibility and accepting of one another, then it's going to feel a lot easier. That's my experience. But I understand kids, this, I get it. People say this all the time. And I'm not discounting that. I'm sure there's going to be challenges, but I think when you're both in it together, willing to do the work consistently, it should be easier.
It should be easier, but that doesn't make it easy. And I think for all of us, we have a different level of tolerance and nervous system capacity and desire to be with that person is the foundation. So I have couples in my sphere who had deep attachment wounds, were clearly a perfect match for each other in every way, and yet their attachment wounds were so strong that the first 3 years of their relationship was just absolute chaos, but they had tools, they had therapy, they had somatic work, they had processes, and they just kept going because they loved each other. And they did get to the other side. And so I've seen both. And sometimes it just depends on your personality. If you're a really fiery person who's very expressive, and so is your partner, this is Ben and I, there's going to be more outward conflict than the type of couple who's maybe more inward and avoidant or just non-confrontational in conflict. When you get two scrappers, even if they're doing the work, when there's something coming up, it's going to look different than the other couple who's perhaps more muted in terms of their expression. Neither is right or wrong. It's just going to be different. And we have to assess what we're tolerant of, what our boundaries are, and make agreements for how we're going to navigate conflict so that we don't destroy the relationship along the way, which we can easily do. We have to say, okay, well, these are the boundaries, this is the agreements, and we have to lean in a little bit and honor our partner, even if it's hard, do some things that we maybe don't naturally do to create safety so that we can get there.
I can't remember if it was the Gottman Institute that talked about like one of the number one factors of deciding if a relationship's going to work or not is how you fight together.
Yeah.
It's like how you argue or communicate when there is a disturbance, when there is a frustration, when there's a breakdown. It's how you have agreed to fight, essentially. And I think that could really hurt relationships more or hurt feelings more if you fight in an unfair way that's not agreed upon.
Yeah.
If you cross a line too much, if you're, oh, that's a little too abusive, that's a little too dismissive, that's not nice. We can disagree and argue, but you can still be kind.
Yeah.
You don't have to scream and yell and call names because that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And that's often what happens is we continue to go down these pathways, these nervous system responses that we're used to. And even though we love our partners, we destroy the relationship and then we can't repair because there's just too much damage done. And then we end up in the inner work.
Why do you think people are so reactive when there is an emotional trigger where for some people that trigger may not matter at all? They may have said, why are you so explosive? Why are you so reactive or so hurt over this little thing? When other people there's a button inside of their wound and it just like, they explode, they react. What will it take for people to overcome that? And why do they stay that reactive as adults?
It's body memory from obviously early childhood, but sometimes not so obviously when we're teens or in our earlier years where, we've been deeply hurt or betrayed by somebody. And that button gets pushed and that old familiar feeling and that story that I'm not loved or I'm not safe or I'm being taken advantage of or I'm going to be left alone or attacked, all of these stories, those get activated in the body memory. And so it's often an unconscious thing when we get triggered or activated in a relationship, all of a sudden we're blowing things out of proportion because the mind is saying you're not safe, defend or run, those two options. And those are nervous system patterns. And so we can't really think our way out of it. And it's helpful to have tools. It's helpful to have self-awareness, but meditating isn't going to be the answer. The answer is going to be working with your body to reorient to what it feels like to be safe and secure inside of you. So I can be in relationship with you while being present with my own body. So we can have multiple relationships happening at once. My relationship with me, my relationship with you, the relationship we share together. There's this ability, once we have a regulated nervous system, to know the difference between my emotions and your emotions. And we don't have that when we're coming from that wounded inner child that gets very thrown off kilter anytime something is disturbed in the safety or, anything with the security is threatened, which can be as simple as for some people as their partner going out for dinner with their friends.
Isn't that interesting? Or it could be such a threat for some people. It's like, you're going out too late, you're going with these guy friends, or I don't trust you going to this place. It's like such a threat for that.
Yeah, for somebody who's experienced betrayal or abandonment, or perhaps their parents got divorced and then their mom or their dad remarried and they felt replaced, that's going to be the kind of situation that will cause deep jealousy or feelings of insecurity and worry. And so again, it comes back to working with the body memory and being able to recognize in those moments, oh, I'm having body memory that I'm not safe, but actually I am safe. I'm here now, and it's okay for me to let go of this story right now. And I'm going to do something to regulate myself, let my partner go and live their life. Perhaps I can go and live my life.
Right.
but that takes work for somebody who's experiencing anxious attachment. They'll more likely sit on the couch and stew and wait for their partner to come home and then create a fight than they would to think to call their own friend and go out and just have a good time. Not in a revenge way, but to just actually nourish themselves on a social level,
Yes.
or do something that's important to them, like pursue one of their hobbies or get something done that's needed on their to-do list. And that's what it means to come back to center and to mature in relationship so that we can live lives as individuals and create interdependence.
What do you think is the biggest mistake people make in relationships?
Oh my gosh, what a big question. I would say one of the biggest mistakes that people make is confusing their partner for somebody from their past and not being aware of it. Usually that's a parental figure, the mom or the dad, and then acting from that wounded inner child rather than bringing their adult self forward and seeing their partner as an enemy. Because if you look at people's relationship histories, myself included, there's a lot of chaos and us versus them and people becoming enemies in the end. And isn't it strange that we go out into the world looking for somebody to share love with, and then more often than not, we just hurt each other repeatedly, and then we blame each other, and then we go off and try to find somebody new, and we just keep repeating the cycle. And that's not love. That's not healthy love. That's just wounds repeating the cycle. And so what we have to realize is that often we're actually in relationship with a projection of the person who hurt us that we didn't heal with.
Wow. Give me an example.
For me, it was always my mom, right? Even with my past marriage that I talked about, that projection for me was my mom. So I was projecting all of my anger, all of my disgust, all of my sadness and my hurt onto this person that I was in relationship with, and he, me. And so on an unconscious level, we didn't have trust, we didn't have safety, and we were on opposite teams because we were punishing each other for the ways that we had been hurt.
From the past,
Yes.
not from what they were doing.
Well, there were obviously things that we were both doing that were out of alignment, but the ability to recognize why we were doing those things wasn't there. We all do things when we're reacting from a past wound, but it's coming from somewhere. And it's often that past shadow figure, that person in the unconscious mind that represents the mom or the dad or the caregiver who didn't show up for us and didn't provide the security and the love and the safety that we needed to develop that whole sense of self. And so we have to go back and do that repair work and then grow up. We have to mature.
Yeah. We have to emotionally mature and go back into the wounded psychological phases of our childhood and mend those phases.
Yeah.
And create new meaning around what those memories were so they can support us now as opposed to hurt us now. Is that right?
And recognize in those moments when that inner child, that wounded, scared child is coming to the front and center, and be able to access our inner mother or inner father
And self-soothe.
and parent them, self-soothe.
In a healthy way.
Yeah.
Not through numbing or alcohol or addictions or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Shopping,
Right.
Netflix, whatever, And then once we have that relationship built, we can actually start doing the deeper work with our partners. I don't know if you've ever heard of Imago work with Harville and Helen. Harville Hendricks, he and Helen Hunt, they wrote the book Getting the Love You Want, and they're elders. I've studied with them.
I've heard of that book, yeah.
Yeah, and they're them and the Gottmans. Those are sort of the elders that we owe so much gratitude to for all of this work that we now access, and even many of us teach. And their whole model is about working with the inner child, which they don't really say it that way, but it's that hurt child and the parent figure, and seeing how much we choose our partners based on an exact template of who our parents were, both the good and the bad. So for example, when Ben and I went to an Esalen retreat years ago before we had our daughter, and we did a retreat with them. And one of the questions was, what is the thing that excites you most about your partner? What drew you to your partner most? And what is the thing that your partner does that hurts you the most?
Same thing.
different, but also they ask you that about your parent.
Oh.
And so when I looked at the thing that I loved most about my mom was the exciting, spontaneous adventures we would go on.
Right. The play times
Yeah.
every now and then.
And the things that I didn't like the most or that hurt me the most was her emotional unavailability and abandoning me when I needed her. And then when I looked at how I had related to Ben, it was virtually the same, because we were playing out some avoidant, anxious patterns early on. And it was stunning to see that I also fit the exact template of his childhood, where I was critical of him. And
He had a critical mom or
and
something.
he had a critical parent who he didn't feel seen and appreciated by. And that was the thing that I would do, and sadly sometimes still do. If I'm not being my best self, I'll get critical. And so we fit these exact templates of each other's parents. But if we're aware of it, then we can also say, well, what is that thing that you really needed? What is that thing that you really needed to feel loved? And then we do that thing every single day. And so we're healing each other's wounds, healing each other's child selves by essentially reparenting our partner's inner child.
So you're reparenting his inner child,
And he's reparenting mine.
Really?
And we're reparenting ourselves as
I was
well.
gonna say, because if we only do it to the other person and not to ourselves, is that going to support us long term?
No, of course not. Though
Doing it ourselves and supporting, yeah.
Yeah, because there's this, especially in the conscious relationship realm, we hear a lot of these memes and this kind of rhetoric that we should be ultra independent. And it's not said that way, but it's like you're responsible for your own emotions. Nobody can make you feel anything. And you're only responsible for you and them for them. And it's not your partner's job to heal you. And while that's true that it's not your partner's job to heal you, when you enter into a partnership, you become each other's allies. And you both bring wounds to the table. And it actually is a gift to your partner to say, hey, what's something that I could do to nurture and nourish your inner child? And here's what you could do to nurture and nourish mine. And that's a gift that we give. And it's not about expecting it or demanding it. But if we truly want to heal in relationship, then we actually do take on each other's baggage as a team. And that's not something that a lot of people talk about these days, because we're in this far swing to the other end of the pendulum, because we've gone from these very enmeshed relationships. Now we want to go to this total ultra independence. But somewhere in the middle lies the beauty of doing the dance together and saying, you know what? I'm your ally in healing. I'm going to be your partner in healing. How can I love you better? Here's how you can love me better. And let's do this thing. Because I think so many of us go through these things. And I wonder, what's the difference between a person who experiences just as much or more trauma and doesn't make it out versus a person who does. And sometimes I feel that it comes down to knowing that we were loved. Because even though I went through so much pain,